Ladies and gentlemen, there was a special screening of a short film for a select audience. The film began, and for the first 2 minutes, there was just one scene, a scene of a white ceiling and a fan running. Time passed, people were getting restive, they're getting restless. For the next 2 minutes also, there was no change in the scene. The same scene continued, white ceiling, fan running. And at that point, the audience got completely, exasperated, and they were beginning to get up from their seats and leave in a huff. At that very instant, there was a ticker, a scroll that came on the screen. You have seen for 4 minutes what this child sees for her entire life, 24/7, day after day. And that is when the scene changed, and the camera tilted down from the ceiling to a hospital bed where there was a child strapped to a hospital bed with a spinal injury. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. A pandemic is a time for empathy. It's a time for introspection. It's a time for sensitivity. It's a time for all of us to step into the shoes of the other person. Many of us complained, at least during the initial lockdowns, that we had to stay at home. Forgetting for a minute, there were several people who had no place to call a home. We stood on our balconies and we did all kinds of things, but what about those who never had a roof above their heads? Now, during a pandemic, during a public health emergency, and I understand that, since we are completely out of time and law is considered a boring subject, and a legal subject during lunchtime can be a double whammy, but I promise to do justice to my audience. Especially during a public health emergency like a pandemic, the role of courts, one of the important estates of a democracy, is extremely crucial and important. This is when the courts are expected to actually review executive action or executive inaction. They are meant to fill a vacuum, to perhaps push boundaries, and to, even if required, reach the constitutional line of control, as long as it is for relief for the common citizens, for we the people. That is what the Constitution of India starts with, those words, we the people. Now, in the past, let's look at the history of the functioning of our courts very briefly. In the past, a simple postcard, a simple inland letter, a news item in a newspaper could galvanize the courts into action, and we've seen that through a string of public interest litigations that changed the face of India. MC Mehta versus Union of India brought about landmark legislations on environmental pollution. DK Basu versus Union of India, in fact versus state of West Bengal, brought about those 11 commandments on the power of the police to arrest. Vishaka versus state of Rajasthan paved the way for a law on sexual harassment. Sheila Barse versus state of Maharashtra led to the creation of separate cells for women in prisons. Pandit Parmanand Katara versus Union of India prioritized action in accident cases with the dictum medical attention first, legal formalities later. Murli Deora versus Union of India gave us a ban on smoking in public places. This has been the history of public interest litigation in our country. Now, legal remedies during a pandemic. The doctrine, ladies and gentlemen, of separation of powers, I do concede, is a basic structure of the Constitution and cannot be tampered with. But this doctrine of separation of powers need not be written in stone in the Constitution, because there are different checks and balances envisaged. However, in this present scheme of things, I see three important hurdles that come in the way of public interest litigation. One is locus standi, second, publicity, and third, policy decisions. Now, as far as locus standi is concerned, I am conscious of the fact that I am not addressing an audience that is well versed with the law. Locus standi simply means, what is your business? But the courts have ruled that ruled on the question, the doctrine of sufficient interest. If I, as a concerned citizen, have sufficient interest in a particular cause, then nothing prevents me from knocking at the doors of the courts under Articles 226 or Article 32 of the Constitution of India before the High Courts or the Supreme Court respectively. Secondly, publicity. A lot of people, brand PILs as publicity interest litigation. My point is, why demonize publicity? Why is publicity such a bad thing? Why can't the cause be bigger than an individual's quest for 15 seconds of fame? If publicity can be an incentive to bring about social change, so be it. The third hurdle, policy decisions. Courts are often hesitant to stray into the policy domain, which is the domain of the legislature, which is the domain of the executive. Now here again, I for one believe that emergencies cannot wait for policies, and constitutional prescriptions cannot become dead letters. During an urgent situation or scenario, the courts must intervene and must be the voice and champions of the cause of the little man, that's you and me. Yes, we have seen video conferencing, we have seen several issues, and I would like to look at constitutionalism during this pandemic through a few important cases that have made national headlines. The first, as we know, is the migrants crisis. Now, on Independence Day, and on any day for that matter, I am totally opposed to the use of the term migrants. How can a citizen be called a migrant in his or her own country? We have seen, ladies and gentlemen, heart-rending images of people, of workers, trudging several hundred kilometers to their native places. No transport, no food, at least initially, hundreds of kilometers. We've seen a young daughter putting her father on a cycle and cycling almost 500, 600 kilometers to a native place. And when this issue first came up before the Supreme Court, what did the court say? The court said, if they've got food, why do they need wages? I was shocked. It's almost like saying, if somebody has got a bandage, why do they need a doctor? Please understand that these migrants, the workers, do not want gratis, they do not want something free. They work hard, they work away from their homes and families. And this is not a situation that they are quite happy with, to be able to be getting free food distributed in a line. That was not an issue. That was a big humanitarian crisis. And like many jurists in this country, especially former Chief Justices, judges of the Supreme Court, I for one believe that the Supreme Court's initial handling of the migrant issue was a tad disappointing. Now, the second aspect that many of you would have heard about, the Simon Hercules case. Dr. Simon Hercules, a few months ago in Chennai in Tamil Nadu, the southern state of India, to which I belong, 2 doctors who died of COVID, their funeral processions were vandalized by mobs of people who knew nothing about the pandemic. There was a in fact, an unfounded apprehension that it could spread, despite very clear guidelines from the Union Health Ministry that transmission is only through droplets, and dead bodies do not spread the virus unless it is through the lungs during an autopsy. Ironically, just a few weeks after the Prime Minister of India appealed to citizens to stand on their balconies and clang plates and clap hands and give a standing ovation to all the healthcare professionals in the country, you had these absolutely despicable incidents of medical professions, of doctors' funerals being vandalized. These medical martyrs did not have a peaceful last journey to the world beyond. Now look at what the law says. The law is very clear. In fact, various courts have also held that Article 25, the freedom of religion, includes the right of relatives to bury the deceased in accordance with their religious rites and rituals and practices. Now, as there is no possibility of transmission of the virus from a dead body to living beings, the fact that there were these people during a lockdown who violated the lockdown and came and disrupted the funeral procession, that itself was a form of untouchability, expressly banned by Article 17 of the Constitution of India. Now, apart from that, the most important of our fundamental rights, Article 21 of the Constitution, includes a right to a dignified and a decent final journey to the world beyond. Due to these 2 shameful incidents, now what happened? Mercifully, the Madras High Court took suo motu action of the Dr. Simon Hercules case and took this and questioned the government. And thanks to that initiative by the court, it's important to give credit where it is due, there was a standard operating procedure that came into place. Adequate police protection was being provided to funeral processions. In fact, even the union government passed an ordinance, because obviously Parliament is not in session, to protect healthcare workers in the country. However, has there been further follow-up on that? That's a big question. Now, the second important aspect that I find that really could have been handled better was the fleecing of patients in private corporate hospitals, patients who were diagnosed with corona. Now, if the corona did not debilitate you, the hospital bill would wipe out your savings. If media reports were to be accurate, treatment costs ranged from 30,000 rupees a day to 1.5 lakh rupees a day if you needed a ventilator or other, if you had serious comorbidities. So that translates into, if it's a 14-day stay, anything between 7 to 15 lakhs per patient. Imagine if the entire family is affected, a family of 4, where would the average Indian citizen be able to spend 50-60 lakh on treatment? Because there was this case, a situation in many hospitals, many government hospitals across the country that were running full. At least media reports told us that many government hospitals were running full. So there was a shortage of hospital beds. Although this has been disputed by the authorities, there were initial media reports suggesting that. There was a sense of panic. Now, of course, I'm happy to know that things are fairly under control. But the right to life under Article 21 includes the right to health, includes the right to timely medical treatment. The Supreme Court has said nobody should be deprived of timely medical attention because of economic disability. You look at, in fact, clause 1.8 of the Indian Medical Council's regulations, Professional Conduct, Etiquette and Ethics Regulations 2002, which was amended in 2016. It clearly says the personal financial interests of a physician should not conflict with the medical interests of the patients, and patients should be informed about the cost of treatment before the treatment actually begins. It may be difficult at a practical level, but this is what this is what the Medical Council had mandated. If this code was extended to hospitals, one is inclined to ask if these high COVID treatment charges were made transparent at the time of admission. Now, a lot of people would say yes, careful scrutiny of the COVID hospital bills. In fact, many hospitals pleaded helplessness. They said that the cost of personal protection equipment was very high. They had to keep changing that. The cost of maintaining isolation wards in hospitals was very high. Added to the fact that there's been a dip in revenue, a significant dip in revenue, in terms of skeletal patient inflow, elective surgeries being postponed because of the crisis. So hospitals had their own tales of woe. But if we look at it from a very practical level, many of us have medical insurance, at least for the lucky ones who could afford medical insurance, Mediclaim policies. You should understand that room rent is a very crucial aspect when it comes to hospitalization. And usually, let's say room rent is capped at 1% of the total value of your policy. So if you have a medical insurance policy of 5 lakh rupees, your room rent is capped at 5,000 rupees a day. But for an isolation room rent, every day it costed about 25 to 30,000 rupees in many corporate hospitals, just the room rent. So where was medical insurance in that case? Now it took a media outcry. In fact, some high courts dismissed these petitions, saying that let the concerned people come before us. Why should PILs be filed? Supreme Court is still hearing the matter. It's adjourned the matter. It's still pending in the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court has asked certain pertinent questions. And thanks to questions from the Supreme Court, thanks to a media outcry, especially a social media outcry and sections of the media, in states like Tamil Nadu, a reasonable cap was imposed on COVID treatment plans, with the option of home quarantine. So this is a case where the courts, the common man, the social media and the media came together, the different estates of democracy came together to tell the executive, look, this is what you need to do during a pandemic. You need to spare a thought for those who cannot afford medical care during this crisis. Now there was another big crisis that was brewing in Tamil Nadu, and I'm giving you examples directly from my state because this is something that resonates with the rest of the country as well. These are common issues across the country, across India. The Tamil Nadu government had announced a timetable for the conduct of school examinations with a set of precautions. This was at the time when the COVID-19 was still at its peak. It would have exposed over 9 lakh students and 2 lakh teachers and invigilators, and came close on the heels of a super spreader event in the form of one of Asia's biggest fruit and vegetable markets called Coimbatore in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu, where there was a super spreader event and several people in fact were infected. Close on the heels of that, now a slew of writ petitions were filed in the Madras High Court. I had also prepared one contending that lives matter more than marks, and the right to life under Article 21, I can see the professor smiling when I say lives matter more than marks. The right to life under Article 21 includes the right to precautions like staying at home during a pandemic, during a steadily escalating public health emergency. Now, legislative assemblies were shut, parliament was shut. Why should poor students be made to take that risk? That was our argument. Now, the government had talked about precautions. They talked about thermal screening. Please understand, how did corona come into our country? Mainly through the airports. Mainly through, we blame the migrants and all that, but it's the rich people, not the poor people, who actually spread corona. Mainly through the airports. Inevitable perhaps, but then many people, many passengers, in order to beat the thermal screening at the airport on arrival, took paracetamol tablets 1 hour before the flight could land. So that was a failed protocol. That was a failed protocol, and the Tamil Nadu government was planning to use that failed protocol for examinations. Mercifully, when the matter was being heard in the Madras High Court, when the judge, the division bench, asked some pertinent questions, the government saw reason, fell in line, and postponed the exams. In fact, didn't postpone, cancelled the exams, and passed students based on their past performance. Thank God for small mercies there again. There again, a classic case of the courts and citizens and the government falling in line with what the court had directed, not what the court had at least going to direct. Then there's a very unique issue when it comes to Tamil Nadu. Liquor sales. We do know that there is there's a company called TASMAC. Those may not be familiar with it, those who are out of Tamil Nadu, but TASMAC is basically a state government-run liquor trade of the government. The state has a monopoly over liquor retail trade. Liquor accounts for one of the highest sources of revenue for the government. I'm sure it's the case with many other parts of the country as well. During the pandemic and a lockdown, there was an outrageous move to open these liquor shops, as if that was a huge priority. That would have not only led to another corona cluster like the Coimbatore vegetable market cluster, because people tend to crowd these liquor shops, and people who are drunk are really not going to be in a frame of mind to wear masks and to maintain social distancing. That's common sense. Also, another very important socio-economic problem, it would have pushed up liquor-related domestic violence, as during the lockdown, the perpetrators and the victims, that is women, wives and children, would be locked in their homes together with these people who would come home drunk. So a batch of petitions were filed in the Madras High Court. The Madras High Court stayed this. The government went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in fact, lifted the stay, vacated the stay, remanded it back to the Madras High Court, and matter is still pending now. But thanks to some relief granted, at least in Chennai, where I live, liquor shops are still closed. Okay, so talk of priorities. The next important case that would have shocked the conscience of the whole country was the Satankulam, a place in Tamil Nadu, in Tuticorin district, Satankulam in southern Tamil Nadu, where custodial torture took place and legal safeguards took a beating. Now, I remember Justice Krishna Iyer, the erudite Justice Krishna Iyer, once said, the police must use their wits and not their fists to actually extract confessions, to actually get out the truth during investigation. But third degree methods are the order of the day. If you read the Amnesty International reports, you will know more graphic details. And something very similar happened in a Satankulam police station in Tamil Nadu. A father-son duo, Jairaj and Benix, over a dispute about the time of closing their mobile phone shop, they were taken into custody, beaten, tortured, and they died as a result of the injuries suffered during that torture. This was a classic George Floyd case of India. It was an equivalent of a George Floyd case. There was a public outcry, there was an uproar. But here again, the division bench of the Madurai bench of the Madras High Court took suo moto on their own based on newspaper reports. They took note of this. They took suo moto notice of this. They asked the government questions. They even started monitoring the investigation. The case was then, after that, the case picked up traction, transferred to the CBCID, finally handed over to the CBI. The officers concerned were booked, arrested, remanded to jail, booked for murder and other serious charges. So, and what was really tragic about this whole case is that the actual offense, even if they had been convicted of not closing your shop on time, was such a petty offense under the Indian Penal Code. The maximum punishment would have been 1 month imprisonment and 200 rupees fine. But they lost their lives. It was almost as if they were executed or something like that. Now, our legal safeguards, the various courts have recognized the fact that, there's a phrase, honor among thieves. There's also honor among policemen, because what really happens within closed doors inside a police station is known only to the police. But the same police officials have to testify against their colleagues. There's a serious flaw with that problem. And therefore, this explains a low conviction rate for custodial crimes in India. And the Law Commission had rightly flagged, the Law Commission in its 152nd report had rightly flagged this. The sheer lack of deterrence is because the term torture does not figure in India's penal or constitutional law. Let me repeat that. The term torture has not been mentioned in India's penal and constitutional law till date. The Prevention of Torture Bill, which started in 2010, has been hanging fire for over a decade. It's lapsed. In fact, the Law Commission tried to revive it in its 273rd report. It came up with a draft Prevention of Torture Bill. Basically, this bill provided for life imprisonment of public servants on conviction for torture, on presumption of torture, on the burden of proof on officers in case of injuries caused during custody, as well as compensation. Many states have been dragging their feet and are yet to send their views. Why is that when Parliament is not in session? Why can't we have an ordinance to ban torture in our country? In fact, Article 5 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights prohibits torture. Police stations, ladies and gentlemen, must become the safest place for citizens, not torture chambers. Now, I for one believe that there are several other legal reforms where the courts could have actually played a role. Today, the courts are being accused of coming down too hard on public spirited citizens, especially senior lawyers, with contempt of court. Where should this colonial relic be retained on the statute book, the Contempt of Courts Act? We've seen that in the case of Prashant Bhushan. Of course, I don't want to comment further on this because it's still pending sentencing on the 20th of this month. But when it comes to legal reforms, there are several laws which call for an overhaul. Like for instance, 24 hours. What is this holy grail of 24 hours? Why should a person be kept in custody for within 24 hours he should be produced before a magistrate? 24 hours is a lot of time. A lot of time evidently to inflict torture and even kill people. So why can't that be reduced to a couple of hours? What is the big challenge in producing somebody before a magistrate in a couple of hours? Why 24 hours? Why 24 hours? We are going by the Criminal Procedure Code, we are going by the Indian Penal Code of 1860, the Indian Evidence Act of 1872. It's time to relook at all these laws. Finally, as I promised you that I would be the pilot who would try and get the flight land safely ahead of time, I'd like to leave you with my conclusion that courts need to be like a father figure. Courts need to be like a father figure because citizens cannot be orphaned during a pandemic. That's the last door you knock at during the pandemic. While your fundamental rights may not be suspended, your fundamental rights like the right to movement are greatly restricted. If you can't go to the executive, if the parliament is not functioning, if the assemblies are not functioning, yes, the media has been doing a great job highlighting various excesses. The courts should really come to the rescue of the common man. And let the courts remember what Justice Krishna Iyer said. The Supreme Court, for instance, the Supreme Court is not final because it is infallible. It is infallible because it is final. Thank you.